Hey, so I have an idea for one of them fancy Star Warses. Let's go to another galaxy. I don't know, maybe one far, far, far away, and we wipe away everything except the Force. No Jedi, no Sith, no lightsabers, no rebels, no Empire, or other factions we lazily hang those labels on because we're terrified that the audience won't connect to a new story without familiarity. You've done Space Monks versus Space Vampires. What else you got? Put a gifted team of writers, once you decide to pay them fairly, into a room and ask them a simple question. If the Force is the only constant in the universe, how would life manifest around it in a completely new galaxy? How about the story of the first person to be Force sensitive? Maybe they think they're a god and they consolidate power and create an oppressive religion, which then becomes complicated when others start to use the Force and his divinity is questioned. Who rises up to set things right? Or you go simpler and you do a Spider-Man where a nobody suddenly finds out that they can move things with their mind, and they discover with great Force powers comes great Force responsibility. Or a story where the Force only manifests in an infant and a band of plucky underdogs have to protect Star Baby from all the evil groups out to get them. But in the writer's room you frame nice and big for everyone to see, no crutches. It stays disconnected from everything that you've done before. No Bib Fortuna hanging out in the background. No Imperial symbol on a mysteriously buried piece of scrap metal. Mando doesn't pop out of a portal and say, "Oh, the universe-hopping wormhole worked after all." For 10 years, you commit to this new universe. You build something new that lives or dies on the stories and characters that you create starting now. New weapons, new aliens, new ships created by new writers, brought to the screen by new directors with new visions for how it all looks and feels. I don't know. I'm ready. What about you? I want to compare a scene from Ahsoka and Andor. Both are 3 minutes long and occur at roughly the same point in their respective first episodes. And I think it encapsulates the difference between the rollout of plot and the unfolding of story. Ahsoka and Hera meet to exchange information. Neither of them know who these villains are, if they're Jedi, or what their relationship to Morgan might be. Ahsoka pulls out the star map, tells Hera what it is, that it leads to Thrawn, reiterates who Thrawn is, someone Hera already knows. Hera suggests someone who can help open the map, which Ahsoka says she already knows. Then Hera walks away. Nothing in their interaction illustrates their individual character. They have the exact same motivation, and all we know now is that these two main characters have the same unanswered questions. In Andor, we're introduced to Cyril, whose posture is stiff, demeanor is by the book, and is clearly obsessive about his job from the revelation that he modified his own government-issued uniform, which irritates his dismissive and pompous superior. As the scene plays out, we learn for the first time there's a hierarchy of command outside the Empire, but within that system there's almost a routine willingness to bend the rules to avoid red tape, which Cyril shows disdain for as he's lectured on the realities of the bureaucracy that governs the galaxy. It moves the ball. We now know more about the world and the characters. The dramatic tension is raised, and it's funny. It's a scene you have to see to appreciate what happens next. And these aren't even the heroes of the show, but there's a finesse in the way it hides the basic checklist of plot elements for the audience in the subtext of a passive-aggressive interaction between a minor character and only one of multiple antagonists. Shows like Ahsoka I watch because I want to see the unfolding of lore, but I only care about the lore because of the quality of storytelling in shows like Andor. All right, you are really lucky. Are you ready to hear the next chapter of the Star Wars? Okay, so there's this Senate filled with representatives who speak for alien races, but sometimes planets and sometimes government entities. And they're dealing with the rumor a federation is blocking trade to a planet. What? Now there's a queen who speaks to the Senate on behalf of that planet, though there's another race living there that she does not represent. And even though she's not a senator, she votes to destabilize the credibility of the Supreme Chancellor's plotting corrupt bureaucracy. But is it really her? Because this whole time she's been switching with her handmaiden while marooned on a planet where the only way to get the part for their ship that they need is to bet their ship on an enslaved kid's race, where if he wins, the boss gets the winnings because he paid the entry fee, but they get the part, their ship, and the kid goes free, but not his mom. Now, this is all orchestrated by a guy who's also secretly growing an army that he's gonna use to destroy the Jedi. After that army helps the Jedi destroy the groups he's convinced to break away from the corrupt bureaucracy, but they're doing it in a bad way, so instead of calling them rebels, we're calling them separatists. Now, the Jedi discover this army, though they think they created it. This is in the course of them investigating a bounty hunter who hired another bounty hunter who programmed a drone to release slugs to take out that queen, who's no longer a queen but is now a senator, to keep her from voting against the creation of the army that was already created, and even though we already established others besides senators can vote. So the army, the Jedi didn't know they didn't create, and don't know is programmed to take them out, takes them out. After they help take out the Separatists, led by a former Jedi who doesn't know he's going to be taken out and replaced by the kid who won the race, who is our hero but a murderer. Eh?
I can't stand the argument that Star Wars is made for kids. Because it is, but also that's not an excuse to lack internal consistency. Imagine if the next Toy Story movie comes out and Woody's an asshole and Buzz is made of Play-Doh and you walk out and your friend's like, it is made for kids. That wouldn't sit right with you because of the franchise's previous commitment to the audience. In modern Star Wars, being run in with a lightsaber is a momentary inconvenience, which confuses anyone who was a fan long enough to remember when moments like that were pretty consequential. What's happening now isn't like a twist on those classic stories. It's the writers finding those classic stories inconvenient. Star Wars is for kids, yes, but also keep in mind Lucas began the beginning of the saga, the first episode, with the phrase, "The taxation of trade routes is in dispute." It's for kids, but it's also pretty dense. Oh, it's a goofy cartoon lizard acting as interim senator manipulated by corrupt bureaucracies to exalt the Supreme Chancellor with emergency powers. Even modern Star Wars digs in a lot into religion and philosophy, and every other scene the main characters are just like walking into a room to get exposition from some kind of government tribunal explaining factions and hierarchies of power. So Star Wars is made for kids, but it's also suggesting that there is more there to see than just the dangling of keys from the Flash Gordon serials it's based on. So when I criticize it, I'm not like clutching at my lost youth. I'm not having a temper tantrum that the times are a-changin'. I'm trying to stoke a new kind of responsibility for creators. Because if the modern media landscape is just going to be refusing to create anything new and just leaning into the same half a dozen bankable IPs, I think the trade-off should be that it gets harder and harder for those creators to keep telling those stories because good stories require internal consistency. Look at what happened with Terminator. The last movie suggested that the last 3 sequels didn't happen. I went to see them, and now audiences are less and less interested because we don't know what the identity of the IP is anymore. Now, I'm not saying it's easy to keep the lore consistent, but I'm not the one who decided to keep telling stories in this universe. Yes, it's made for kids, but you also are asking me to come back. You're throwing up that familiar music and the familiar logo, and you want me to identify with this property based on my previous investment in it. And I will come back if you respect the stories that got me invested in the first place. Great, glad we cleared that up. I'm sure the comment section will be fine.
Hey everybody, got a little update of the nice clean slate that we're leaving for the new DCEU. So, The Flash set up a new Aquaman who's not in the Lost Kingdom since the trailer references characters from the now non-existent DCEU, which has been respectfully collapsed by a can of tomatoes. Blue Beetle is somehow in the new DCEU, though that movie shows a fast food place from the old DCU and references a pre-existing Flash, Batman, Superman, and Lex Luthor. And the characters shouldn't be confused by magic technology since according to the upcoming Creature Commandos, this is a universe where Frankenstein fought in World War II. But that show also has returning characters from the old Suicide Squad, so who knows? But good news, we've cleaned up the timeline with one less Batman since the fan-favorite Tim Burton version that we all grew up with heroically sacrificed himself against some Kryptonian guy to save a universe that may or may not have immediately also been erased. But that might be offset by introducing Nick Cage Superman, so who knows? Eh? So the MCU is suffering from, how do we say, a lack of storytelling quality. But I think the bigger issue that's not getting talked about is a lack of storytelling economy. Where are we 4 years after Endgame? A clear reset with new direction, new characters, and a new threat, compared to the first 4 years of the MCU. Well, from 2008 to 2012, in 6 movies, we got clear origins, arcs, stakes, and a great team-up payoff. Meanwhile, from 2019 to 2023, we've had 9 movies and 8 shows to kinda set up a multiverse that a few people know about and even fewer understand. I don't need these stories to be perfectly written. I need them to be contained, satisfying adventures. Quantumania wasn't a story that needed to be told. It was a story that needed to set up what happens next. Remember the end of Captain America: The First Avenger? When he wakes up in present day? That wasn't all you got from that movie. You got a full narrative with living, breathing characters, a musical number for God's sake, a story it seemed like the studio wanted to tell, plus that tease at the end for the new adventures to come. You want big team-ups and crisis events to have weight? Then we need to feel for these characters with the time that we're spending with them, and right now, that is not time well spent.
Alright, so I just saw a video of someone yelling at anybody who didn't like the Joker, so here we go. So as a character study about mental illness in a big city, it's pretty good, but as a Joker movie, beyond the fact that I always enjoy him more without knowing his origin, I never quite knew how invested I was supposed to be. Imagine a Doctor Doom origin story not connected to the MCU, and by the end, you don't even know if it actually was Doctor Doom, or someone who inspires Doctor Doom, or even if there ever will be a Fantastic Four. Now look, not everything needs to be connected to an extended universe, sure, but if it isn't, then what is the declarative contained story that you want to tell besides watered down Taxi Driver? Is it connected to comic books at all? Sometimes it seemed like you wanted me to access my established knowledge of the Batman mythos, but then the third act abandons all of that for a much simpler, grounded descent into madness. Now, if in the sequel he's doing Joker stuff, butting up against Batman, becoming the true clown prince of crime, then I'll definitely give the first movie credit for setting a solid foundation for this new story, but I can't preemptively like the first one for the payoff it hasn't given me yet. I don't know, what do you think?
Alright, some spoiler-free thoughts on The Flash. I've said previously, The Flash is in a tough spot because if it's bad, that sucks. DC can't get a movie right even with a decade of prep time. And if it's good, then it's weird to finally get us excited for a universe you're literally telling us you're about to end. And I think it ends up somewhere in the middle. If you can shut your brain off and ignore the studio drama, the moral character of the lead actor, and the lofty expectations of potentially resetting an entire cinematic universe, then it's a peppy popcorn movie that zips through its convoluted story just fast enough that you don't really have time to think about much of anything except the adventure. However, it does suffer from some massive tonal shifts. In the first action sequence, characters are shown with absurd levels of precision over their powers that make it hard to accept anything really being difficult going forward, and there's moments played to cartoon levels of comedy that don't really mesh with the story, also asking us to accept a sincere and grounded central motivation. And while interesting, the story does buckle as each new character introduced sloppily hops on board with the convoluted game plan without question. They just immediately do these cut-tos at the very end of the explanation. Wait, who are you? What do you want? I see. Turns out time travel is real and it could mean the end of everything. We don't have a lot of time. Now, I can't really talk about Keaton's Batman without giving much away, but I was not impressed. But actually for reasons other than my original worry that CG flippy flips would be inconsistent with the Burton aesthetic of the character. Keaton does well with what he's given here, but you'll have to wait for my spoiler breakdown for why it didn't work for me. My biggest problem, though, is that there are these fan-servicey choices here that don't really land the way they're intended. They're portrayed in a style that really mutes the impact that they're hoping for. And while I was never really a fan of the Snyderverse, I was hoping for a bit more of fanfare of a resolution. But yeah, leave me your spoiler-free comments and we'll do a deeper dive soon. Look, I don't talk a lot about Star Wars content outside of the major movies and shows, because a lot of it, while well made, always comes off to me like a band-aid. I criticize the prequels and people are like, well, have you watched Clone Wars? And I'm like, yeah, but I shouldn't have to. Shadows of the Empire is great, but it wasn't necessary reading to make Empire Strikes Back work. Because there's a difference between new content fleshing out an established and strong mythos and needing ancillary materials to retroactively prop up weak writing. Now, what you should strive for is doing such a good job with your main project that additional lore is cool but not necessary. I don't need a 10-part comic book series explaining Luthen's backstory. The show nailed it. Now let me be clear, I'm not saying that you don't get to enjoy your extra Star Wars content, but if your knee-jerk reaction to someone dissatisfied with a movie they paid to see is you should pay to see more, I'd argue the original movie had more of a responsibility to respect the audience's attention in the first place. Because what happens is we've developed this, well, we'll fix it later mentality. Patches on video games correcting issues noticed by people who made the mistake of buying the game on day one. Extra content created to squeeze whatever you can out of whatever you have, which only incentivizes us to tell weaker stories, to create with less attention, and to not fully appreciate or respect that valuable moment when we have an audience's attention. Like now, I've got your attention, and yes, sometimes I make additional content to clarify things, but the intention is always that this can stand alone. I know I may never see you again, so I gotta cherish however long I have with you before you go, nah, I'm gonna keep scrolling. Ooh, a hippo getting a bath. Keep scrolling, was I right? Let me know in the comments. Suggestions for the new DCEU? Part 4. Yeah, I'm not calling it anything consistent till they shake off all the dark universe energy. Where was I? Oh yeah, lethal force ? The problem you had last time wasn't that the characters used lethal force, but that it wasn't consistent. Superman levels Metropolis, then suddenly laments the loss of one life. Do yourself a favor, don't turn around. Wonder Woman splats a guy in front of child hostages who totes want to be like her when they grow up. Batman tries to decapitate people for the kryptonite Lex actually wanted him to steal, but Superman stops him, but doesn't sense the kryptonite, but then Batman gets it later off camera. Oh my god, just recapping that movie gave me a nosebleed. Superheroes don't kill isn't the only way to tell these stories, and it's not the only way DC characters have been interpreted over the years, but it is a strong thematic choice, not just to present, but for the characters to argue over. Wherever they fall on the idea, it grounds them with consistent motivations for when you eventually move to more complex stories. It's a little less jarring than last time when you guys were like, these characters' emotional boundaries, I don't know, but Darkseid's cutting fingers off a Green Lantern. Make the first few stories in the new DCEU off be these characters deciding how they feel about the value of human life. It's also a great way to separate yourself from an MCU that in the movies doesn't really tread this ground. I can't wait to read all of your respectful and measured comments. I have a question. Was Batman 89 even really in The Flash? Spoilers. So as the reviews skew negative more and more, the one consistent positive seems to be Keaton's return as Batman, though many acknowledge the limited effectiveness of speaking only in quips that, like Chewbacca's medal in Rise of Skywalker, only make sense to die-hard fans and not really to the characters in the context of the story. You want to get nuts? Let's get nuts. I guess. I mean, the world is at stake, so we probably should have some discipline in our plan that... oh wait, was that like a catchphrase? Yeah, I'm Batman. Yeah, we know. We came because we already knew that. But I feel like there was something more that felt off about the character's inclusion in the movie, which jumped out at me as soon as he jumped out at them. And that was that even as fan service goes, this didn't seem to be our Keaton Batman. Whoever this Caped Crusader was, he lived in a world that mirrored the Snyderverse in nearly every way. Now, the director of The Flash has gone out of his way to clarify that this was a conscious choice not to replicate the Burton style, as it would have been prohibitive to the movie that he wanted to make. Adding a cheeky remark that he didn't want to deal with all the hats. Yeah, that's right, the guy who decided audiences would accept a dozen CG babies thought hats would be difficult. But okay, that seems to contradict later in the film when the disco ball multiverse reveals everyone's world is matching their assumed aesthetic perfectly. Adam West in 60s Technicolor, George Reeves in black and white, Christopher Reeve apparently in a cutscene on a PlayStation 2. But Keaton's Batman, this Batman, this Batman, this Batman lives in this world? This world. You know, this world. It didn't sit right with me to relegate Burton's universe as something so easy to discard as untethered to the nostalgia that you want me to feel. Now, sometimes a director's style is saturated right down to the character. Beetlejuice or Edward Scissorhands don't work in a Wes Anderson movie, just as Richie Tenenbaum and Steve Zissou don't work in a Tim Burton movie. For these directors, the experience is way more than just the costume or the actor. It's the whole vibe and the world that they inhabit. Now, this isn't as big of a leap for movies like No Way Home. Sam Raimi definitely has a style, but it's still close enough to reality that I can easily accept another director's take on Tobey coming back as one of the Spider's men. If I won't fight for proper grammar on the internet, who will? Now, Tim Burton, on the other hand, he makes beautiful gothic fairy tale nightmares, tableaus of timeless archetypes in exaggerated settings. Any characters inhabiting these worlds are indelibly linked to that dreamy style. It's one of the reasons why the Burton Batman has always been my favorite film take on the character. It's a guy dressed as a bat. It is an exaggeration of themes of fear and vengeance. And every time they do one of those modern, real Gothams where they, have this completely ingenious idea to ask, what if Batman was in the real world? I just start wondering not just what better uses there are for his wealth and how many times he would have been shot by now, but also how many insane clowns shooting rocket launchers through your neighborhood would it take for these citizens to, leave? I'm sorry, my civic pride isn't going to pay these insane insurance premiums living in a city this prone to being frozen. But with Burton, you buy it. Now that is a very different world than the Snyderverse, or anything that we've seen from DC lately. According to the Flash movie, these universes do exist with all of their aesthetic quirks, but it was confusing that the cameo you wanted us to excitedly connect to the most doesn't get the world we already connect with him. You laid in the nostalgia without anything to make me take the bait, which is nuts. Oh, but he did kind of warn us about that. Okay, so I'm rewatching the prequels because I enjoy masochism, and something jumped out at me as a missed opportunity to solidify Anakin's turn to the dark side. A repeated narrative point over all three movies that, with a slight adjustment, could have added some much-needed motivation for his downfall. So Anakin is presumed to be the chosen one, but he never actually talks about it, which you think would come up if you're always complaining about your place within the Jedi. Now, I know things are expanded upon in the novels and the comics, but if, like most people, you just watch the movies, the vague implication is that the prophecy was kept from him deliberately. That should have been a huge reveal and the reason why everything goes down. What if Anakin kept the angst, but instead of the, I'm so mad powerful, make me the youngest Jedi Master ever already, you guys suck, his mindset was, I don't feel like I should be here. I'm not connecting with the Jedi the way that I should. You aren't letting me earn my keep. Something's wrong. And then in a big moment, he finds out that the Jedi, his adopted family who told him to be mindful of his thoughts, have been using him to fulfill a spotty interpretation of their religious dogma the whole time. He can even flash on the only time he remembers being called the Chosen One, by Qui-Gon when he was a scared little boy. Nobody ever actually cared about him. They used him. Now, is that a great motivation? No, but it's better than, sorry, I'm going to go hang out with the bad guys I've been fighting for years because they say they have better prenatal care. Now, some of this is kind of suggested in the movies, but it should have been a specific narrative moment that would have justified why he didn't just leave the Jedi, but why he had to burn it all down. What do you think? Arkham Asylum.
Hi. Yeah, I'm the guy who brought in the Joker a couple days ago.
Oh, yeah, we remember. A rat man, right?
It doesn't matter. So, I just stopped him from bombing an orphanage.
Sorry about that, he escaped.
Look, is there somebody I can talk to? This seems to happen a lot. I bring in Mr. Freeze in the morning, and by that night I'm fighting him on a snowman-shaped blimp.
Well, in our defense, we no longer use iron bars that can get so cold they shatter.
And Scarecrow?
Oh, you try guarding a door when you're scared.
What about Poison Ivy?
You won't believe it, the one cell that had a huge tree outside the window.
Penguin?
He flew out through the skylight.
Why do you have a skylight?
Cuts down on the electric bill.
The Riddler?
In our defense, the riddle he challenged our guards to was really hard.
Okay, I'm just gonna stop bringing them to you. Wait, what's that?
Nothing.
Killer Croc is loose!
Did somebody just say Killer Croc is loose?
No, he said, you're killing those crocs, Moose. People call me Moose.
I'll be right there.
Thank you.
Suggestions for the new DCEU Part 5. How to Superman. I hate to say it, but you have to do Superman first. Not because he's iconic, but because the ultimate Boy Scout needs to make the decision to help people because he has to, not because he was influenced by other superheroes. He has to be everybody else's inspiration. Sorry, DC, you didn't write a built-in reason why your main guy could sit things out for a while. Okay, DC, anybody you see making a Superman movie reading Ayn Rand on set, slap it out of their hand. You're not making Fountainhead. Clark isn't an objectivist icon instilling the values of rational self-interest among parasites clawing at his true potential. He's a boy from Kansas who was raised to say yes sir and no ma'am. He's not complicated, the world is. And we don't need to see Krypton. You want him to be relatable? How about for once you don't start his origin on everyone's least favorite Halo map, or with narration from a disinterested Marlon Brando? What is all this? Where am I? Clark doesn't remember any of it, so why should we? Anything alien we see should be as confusing to us as it is to him. And as for conflict, anything besides what you've done before. I'm not the first person to bring it up, but there are templates for how to give stakes to characters who are way OP. One Punch Man, The Boys. You're not limited to, what about a stronger guy with bigger lasers? I mean, you probably don't have any criticism about all this, but, leave me a comment anyway. All right, everybody, great job wrapping things up. So let's just do a quick recap of the nice, clean slate that we've left for James Gunn. So our last moment of the DCEU from our big Solve Everything movie is after a different Batman helps Flash back to a different world with a different Batman, Barry's tooth falls out, which happened before because he lost his healing powers and he glued it back, which probably isn't great to show kids, but doesn't even make the top 10 things we hope people don't emulate from Ezra Miller, but now somehow falls out after his healing powers came back, which is not addressed in the post-credit sequence with Aquaman, whose now next movie we have to explain if he exists in the Snyderverse or this new Snyder plus Flash movie plus Schumacher ? Universe. Also, a Blue Beetle movie, which we've announced as the first DCU character, but not the first DCU movie. I'm not kidding, look it up. And a new season of Peacemaker with Suicide Squad's Amanda Waller, who wants Shazam in the JSA even though she already has Superman to fight Black Adam. And that's all we have left. Except for the sequels for the non-Suicide Squad Joker and different Batman.